This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Welcome to Humanity is the name of this podcast. And there's a real opportunity when you're listening to this podcast to get welcome to your own humanity. And I know that's been my experience. So my Welcome to Humanity listeners, it's just great to have you back on, and welcome to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. So before I get too tied up in that sort of knot of a thread, here's what we have today. My guest today is somebody who I think I've had some contact with and some sharing with, but never with the point of really getting access to what makes her tick and like really what gives her life, and really what is she up to, and what are the people who are up to being with her. So today's guest is Sarah Marshall, and Sarah was someone who a good friend and colleague, a shared good friend and colleague, Stefan Hines, asked us to do this together. And I think we were both like, oh, well, if that's what you say, that's what we're going to do. And then, right, Sarah? I mean, and then we looked up each other and it was like, oh, yeah, he's right. This is a pretty cool union that we can explore. And so off and running. And here we are today on this podcast interview. So welcome to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, Sarah. It's just a pleasure and honor to have you here with us.
I'm super excited to be here, Fred. Thank you.
You're welcome. So yeah, it really is great. As all of you know, I really do meet a lot of amazing people who are up to big things in the world, and Sarah Marshall is no exception. Each and every one of us, though, we're all dealing with something, right? No matter whether we're taking on some of the big problems of the world or even the little ones, we're all facing challenges internally and externally. So I've been a psychiatrist and a coach for many years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life, and I've worked with more people than I can even count. Many different backgrounds dealing with more issues than I can imagine or than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. Naturally, over time, I've developed some ways to assist them in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. I'm pulling back the curtain on one of those methodologies, and I'm publicly revealing the process and the associated mindset that has contributed to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in this new book I wrote called The Creative 8: Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick it up at Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. As a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go on over to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of The Creative 8 today. I look forward to hearing about your Creative 8 breakthrough. Now, let's get back to our conversation with the wonderful Sarah Marshall. Welcome to Humanity. We used to have what we thought was just a baseline format on how to run this particular podcast, and that's shifted somewhat over time. So it really is an easy first question that we ask, and most of the questions are open-ended and allow you to explore with us, what matters to you. And so, are you ready for the first question?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So, Sarah Marshall, who are you?
That's awesome. Who am I? I am an edge dweller. I am an explorer of worlds. I am classically trained as a naturopathic physician. I am also trained as an intuitive healer, medical intuitive, you could say, although I don't use that phrase very often. I am an author of a cookbook, Food That Grows. I am a daughter, a friend, a partner, and I would say, kind of going back to where I started, like, I'm a really big explorer of humanity. I think that's where a big resonance came when I found out about this project. Like, what matters to me most, which I guess maybe might be another question, but is that people are free and they're empowered. And I'm always fascinated by, like, what has people get freed up and get empowered. And I do a lot of that in my clinical practice inside of health and well-being, but it's definitely my fascination. So like, I'd still say I'm an explorer and an adventurer in that realm.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Well, that's a great answer. And, it sounds like it took you off guard, but what a great answer you came up with. And, when we're describing ourselves from an improvised fashion, the way you just did, there's an opportunity to really look at, wow, this is how I see myself. This is who I am. I'm an explorer. I'm an adventurer. I'm an edge dweller. I'm an author. I'm a naturopath. I'm a writer. I guess you said author, but food that grows. And, you're a daughter. You're a friend. You're an explorer of what makes, what allows humans to feel free, or what allows humans to gain a level of empowerment. And, it's right. It's a little bit different when you hear it from me. Like, oh yeah, check mark, check. Yep, he's right there. Yep, that's right. That is what I said. Yep. And that's the kind of person that you really present the world to as. That's the kind of person that you present to the world as. So how does that feel to hear that that's really who you are in the world? I mean, that's really, not only are you declaring yourself to be that way, but that's how we see you. And that's how humanity can expect you to show up when you show up in their space.
It's exciting. It's like when I was saying it, some of those things I've said before a lot, and some of them I haven't said that way. And I actually got to kind of like, look, what else was there? And so then also when you say it back to me, it was like I got lit up by it, or excited, or inspired. Like there was an emotional response that wasn't there when I said it. When you said it, I had a feeling and a presence about it.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that great? So really, we start getting that hearing something and saying something are two totally different things.
Yeah.
So even though a third person would hear me say it and you say it, and it would for them be that they heard it. They heard it from me, and then they heard it from you. So our listeners, for instance, only heard it said twice. They didn't get the emotional charge that we got when I was listening to you. And when I was saying it was two different experiences. And when you were saying it and then hearing me say it, it was two different experiences. But our listeners, after all, are neither of us. And they just heard it from two different people, and may in fact be like, okay, you guys have repeated this already. Can we move on? And yet what we're really talking about here is the experience of being someone versus the experience of being seen as someone, or being expected to be someone. And it's huge, right? Like who you present yourself as, and then who others see you as is an important distinction. So tell me a little bit more about, like, you said edge dweller to begin with, and I'm really, really curious about that. And, explorer, adventurer, and edge dweller, and, who you are as a naturopath and this author. What a super cool title. I'm going to get this book. How does that all play out in the real world? Like, how does Sarah Marshall walk those steps?
Yeah. So I'm not quite sure where I picked up the edge dweller phrase. I think it was out of a quote from somebody, but it just like landed for me as, if you actually look in nature, the edges are where all the life is. Like the edge of the ocean is where the land meets. That's where all the coral reefs are. That's where the majority of the biodiversity in oceans are, on that edge. And actually, even if you look at jungles, it's the edges. It's the edges of the top of the canopy, the edge where it meets the soil, the edge where the forest meets, the land, like all of that. And so one of the things about naturopathic medicine is we ground our principles of how we practice medicine by looking at laws of nature. So we look out into the laws of nature, and then we apply those themes to the human body. And so for one right there. And so what I know is, in healing somebody's physical body, you have to find those edges and usually take them across them. So one of the other ways that I say that is that you can alter the body's biochemistry, and you can put nutrition in, you can take toxicity out, which is more or less naturopathic medicine in summary right there. Is put nutrition in, take toxicity out, and the body rebalances itself. Because one of the laws of nature is that nature is always striving towards health or sustainability or balance unless something's impeding that from happening. There's like literally an obstacle in the way. Like the river is always going to be running downhill, cutting a swath in the canyon unless it's dammed. And it can't do that. So in naturopathic medicine, I'm mostly removing the obstacles to detoxification and supercharging the body with nutrition. And the body does a lot of sorting itself out. Just that alone. But when we get into the conversation of healing, which interestingly enough has actually been something that I have found myself in my own podcast this year, seems to be the year of podcasts, but it's a medium that we get to have really unique and special conversations. And I created it around an inquiry of what does it really mean to heal? What does it actually take to heal? Like in reality on the court, it's so easy to put up your Instagram before and after pictures and be like, yeah, I did this thing and look at it. I lost 80 pounds. I want to capture the stories of like the challenges, the hard conversations when your spouse comes to you and says, are you kidding me? You're quitting drinking? Like that was our whole social life. I don't know how I feel about it. Or what do you mean you're taking all of the sugar and gluten and flour out of the house when your kids are, wanting, all that stuff. Like I want the real conversations. And I find that edge dwelling and healing is one thing. Going to those edges of the known world and crossing over into the unknown spaces is where that actual transformation, that healing happens for people. And that's like integral. And so in my own life, I've healed things, I've transformed things. I'm always a seeker and looking for like other new experiences, both just because I love life and I like to, I had the privilege to sail a racing sailboat from Hawaii to Los Angeles.
Holy cow.
And spent 17 days crossing the Pacific Ocean in a 50-foot molded piece of fiberglass. Talk about a perspective to turn yourself into, I am a very small, insignificant part of this whole thing. And it was a life-transforming experience for me to actually like confront and be in the middle of the ocean because my only like natural fear is of deep water. So that was remarkable to go get peace with the water world.
Yeah, not just the water world, like the water world.
Really big, really big.
Yeah,
big,
it's not a bathtub or a pond even. No. Yeah.
And one of the greatest things about that experience is actually after the first day, which was actually a really rough weather day. So the water, like the seas were all choppy. But after that, I actually didn't experience being afraid. I would have thought there'd be points of like terror or whatever, but it was just fascinating to like, nope, like you actually can only see so far. And so the horizon lines around us never changed, even though I knew in my head conceptually where we were. And like, especially once we were 5, 6, 7 days away from Hawaii and you're kind of in the middle and you're like 10, 12 days away from California, like that's an interesting spot to be in. But it was just like, this just became our bubble. It became our world and everything got slowed down and easy and routine, and this rhythm of life came out, and it was one of the most peaceful experiences I've ever had.
Well, that's amazing. And I could really see as you're describing that and describing being an edge dweller and describing all the life that is occurring on the edges, as well as, the life force that's embedded in H2O on a world or universal scale.
Yeah.
There's something here that's so grounding, in your exploration. So while you're out on the edges, it also appears that you got access to your core center at the same time.
Yeah, that's exactly it, which is ironic, but not at all. And I find the same thing with my clients in my own process of like, when I'm willing to be courageous and confront the fears of crossing over those thresholds. I mean, I got a divorce. I have altered major aspects of my work life. I've run a telemedicine-based practice for 9 years. That was about 7.5 years before it became a good idea.
Yeah.
And like, I've been willing to take risks and explore and do things. And yet in almost every single time when I cross those thresholds or I confront those challenges, and then I find more peace, more centering, more heart connection, more trusting myself and my intuition by doing that.
Right. All right. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to craft this next this next exploration inquiry with you, but I think there's something here. There's one of the things I'm really noticing. So like we'll go to that before and after Instagram person who lost 80 pounds and yay me, yay me. And that's as interesting as that is. And, certainly it's an outcome that's admirable. It's not where the game was played. And then you really want to be on where was it when your spouse heard that we weren't drinking anymore, or when your kids heard that we're not going to have sugar or flour anymore? Like what went on, or what's going on during those moments of the travels? What's going on like on real time? So that the 80th pound you lost is frankly no more interesting than the 37th pound you lost or the 6th pound you lost when you had to do this or that. Like they're all really interesting and potentially uncomfortable or painful times on our route. Like not only no fear about grappling with the discomfort of life's many journeys, but actually getting that peace resides in exploring every aspect of life, including the uncomfortable ones, or maybe, like I said, amplifying even the uncomfortable ones. Would you like to comment a little bit on this hypothesis that I'm putting forth?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I could be bold and say that's where it all happens. Like for me, and I'm not the person who did lose 80 pounds on Instagram. I kind of use that a little bit as just a flippant example. And I want to just echo that same thing of, I commend the declarations and the motivation and the inspiration that comes from people sharing any of their story. And I also think that there's a missing conversation of just what you're talking about, like validating for people through us sharing our stories that the hard stuff we go through is okay and normal, and other people go through it too. And if anything, it might even be the blueprint, the design to get from the first pound to the 80th, or from the undiagnosed fibromyalgia pain that it just seems like it's in your head and you are, maybe need to just tough it out a little bit. Or someone just says, oh, that's normal, you're just getting old. Although I've had clients that are in their 30s that have been told that. And it's like, no, that is not normal. That's not normal in your 80s either, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
So I think there's this thing of when we're in the middle of our life, if we keep using this analogy, where it's comfortable, that's a wonderful place to be, to enjoy, to relax, to just be with it. And what's predictable is nothing's going to really alter from that space, though. You'll just be in the middle of your life, going through your routines, doing what you usually do. And so for me personally, I know that it's only been when I get uncomfortable enough that I'm even willing to do the work, because it is sometimes a lot of work, either emotionally or physically, to make those shifts, to have the courage to say, I want a divorce, or I don't think this relationship's working, to have the courage to say, I'm going to move to a whole new city and start over, to have the courage to say, like I did at one point, I'm going to move to the Netherlands and live in Europe and create my life over there. And then 2 years later, at the breakup of a relationship, to have to come back to the United States and say, yep, I lived, I threw myself over the edge, I got what I got, I hit rock bottom, and now I'm back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But those, for me, the pain, the fear, the depression, the anxiety are all indicators that there's like another path there. Like it's almost like one of the things I have come as a hypothesis in my own work is the symptoms my clients deal with emotionally and physically are your body's way of telling you you're off track.
Exactly. That makes sense.
And then the heeding of those symptoms, the learning about them, the discovering what makes those symptoms go away because they're getting healed, not suppressed, will literally be like a breadcrumb trail back to becoming in alignment with who you really are.
Hmm. Right. That's fascinating. And really, several of the recent podcast guests have had, I would say, and for any of the listeners who have heard a few of them, you can start hearing there's something thematic that you're pointing at here, which is, I guess in the most simplistic phrase I can come up with is something like no pain, no gain. But there's more than that. There's like the value while it's going on. It's not something that I look for. I don't look forward to my next excruciating experience. And I think I speak for all of us. It's, although I do know that on the other side of whatever that experience is will be growth and development like I've never even imagined. On the other side of this next, whatever it is, excruciating level experience that I might have in my life, the other side of that will be something new, something probably profoundly new and even highly contributing to a life that is enriched as a result of having gone through that excruciation. Now, what's interesting is that I would like to, and all of us, it seems like all of us, the ones who are out here making something happen, have storylines that include, massive breakdowns in the past, massive upheaval or massive painful experiences, massive, and that's almost a requirement, or maybe in fact, it is a requirement to launch from there, not only into healing, but to exploring way out there on the edge, way out there dwelling on the edge is a function of the pain that I have experienced in my life or one has experienced in their life. Anything to say about that?
Oh gosh. Yes. What I was just, as you were talking and I was kind of formulating my thoughts, I wrote down failure with a direct arrow as access to fulfillment. So it's like, and it's not about being stupid or unwise, it's not like, course. Oh, here, let's see how many breakdowns I can, blowing up my life, right? Although sometimes, right before I was courageous enough to say I want a divorce, about a month earlier, I had been at a dinner party that turned into a party and got fairly intoxicated. And that night I told my best friend, don't let me go home tonight because I'm not sure I won't do something harmful to my body.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's incredible and vulnerable and deeply appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah. And the next morning, with a hangover and a headache, I woke up to, okay, if I was willing to end my life, why am I not willing to just end my life without the killing of the body? Like actually kind of got present to, I'm in touch with my body. I like this incarnation. I like the way I turned out. I'm just terrified inside of my circumstances. And if I was willing to pull the plug on the whole thing, why am I not willing to pull the plug on the circumstances of my life? And it was out of that I got the courage to say, this marriage isn't working for me.
You know what? I have to tell you something, Sarah, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. As a psychiatrist and someone trained in this field for over 40 years and 30 years plus, 32 years since I've graduated, as you can imagine, I've dealt with a fair amount of suicidality and a fair amount of, actually even a couple completed suicides, multiple suicide, whether ideations or gestures or threats or attempts and all that, So it's like the bread and butter of modern day psychiatry includes this suicide discussion for sure every day. And I honestly have never heard anybody say what you just said. And you just moved me off of space. And the last person who moved me off of space when dealing with suicide was a long time ago. I have sort of my way of working around or with or through this. This idea of if I was willing to end my life, like pull the entire plug, what about ending my life without ending my physical body?
Yeah.
It's fucking brilliant, Sarah.
Yeah. And I'm definitely over here getting in touch with that whole space again. And like, I had dealt with, and I have a family history, like, there's attempted suicides in my family. There's completed suicides in my family. There's history of mental illness on both sides that runs back multiple generations, coupled right along with, like it often does, child abuse, family abuse, sexual abuse. Like it's in my heritage. And all things considered, I took me through my 20s to about that point. I was 29 or 30, 30, I think. Yeah, when that happened. And that decade had been pretty rough for me. Like a ton of like circumstantial depression was mostly what I dealt with. Turns out there was a lot of roots in blood sugar imbalances and food allergies, and where my body was so far out of balance that, was part of what led me to even go to naturopathic school. And in 5 years of being in naturopathic school, I worked alongside with naturopaths on my own health and made a huge amount of inroads on the physicality of it. But there was some deep tap roots in, for me personally, it was like reconciling a spiritual quest or spiritual, whatever we want to call it, karma, about do I have the courage to live life true to myself, or am I going to be in the world of fulfilling expectations that mostly I invented people had of me? I don't even know if they even had those expectations.
That's right. That's well stated.
I thought they did.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure mostly they were my creation or default setting. Creation might not be the right word. And so that moment, that summer, was pivotal for me in confronting, like, and I got that next year, I got divorced in March, and in April, told my business partner I didn't want to have a brick and mortar four-wall clinic, which we had just invested $65,000 in building over the last 18 months, on top of student loans and everything. And that I was then launching myself into an inquiry of like, how do I want to live? And that was actually how I ended up inventing a boutique consulting practice online that more or less I had not ever seen done by any other naturopaths. I modeled it after my business coach. And those actions all were a fallout of that crux moment.
That's brilliant. So let's take a moment. I think the curiosity has been piqued a little bit here about your boutique naturopathic practice. Is that one that's still in place, or how has it morphed up until now? And what was so new and different about it then that had it be something that you had invented from nothing, that it was clearly successful, made a difference, has led a great deal to who you now have become as a healer? Or at least your interface with the public with respect to who you are as a healer. Tell us a little bit more about this boutique practice that you designed.
Yeah. So it is still absolutely in place. And really, I've just kind of perfected and crafted it over the last 9 years. And for me, the invention part of it is that there's, as you know, as a psychiatrist,
MD. Yeah.
As a psychiatrist, is we are born into, through our schooling, an inherited set of, this is how you do it. Some of which is legal, that part I follow, right? But some of which is just, this is how you do it, right? Like, you are supposed to do physical exams on your patient. But if you actually look, like the last time most of us all went to the doctor, most people, even dealing with chronic disease, they go in, they get their blood pressure, temperature, height, and weight. And unless you're specifically dealing with a fever, which you probably already knew, or you specifically are dealing with high blood pressure, which you also probably already knew most of the time, there's like not any revolution that comes out of those 4 measurements.
Not at all.
But they're considered like bedrock. You have to do it or you're not practicing good medicine.
I understand.
Meanwhile, you're having a 5 to 7 minute on average interaction with the physician themselves due to the way the structure is designed. So part of the quote unquote revolution for me was letting go of the attachment to the rudimentary physical exams. And also, I require all my clients to have a primary care medical doctor to work with me. And I actually end up having more people get better care, utilize their MDs, utilize their physical systems more because I'm the one in a conversation with them about, hey, look, no kidding, you really actually do have to get a colonoscopy. I know, but yes, you do. And so I have more engagement with the conventional medical system because they're working with me. I just don't have to be the one to literally do it. And most doctors are not the ones to literally do it anymore anyways. It's a nurse or an
That's
MA.
right. Mm-hmm.
And I make sure that that happens. So I'm accountable for physical exams being done. I'm just not the one doing them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
And it bends people's brain a little bit because they're like, yeah, but how do you practice medicine over a Zoom call or over a, video call?
Right.
And it's like, well, actually, the way my practice is set up, all new clients go into 2 sessions a month with me, and they're a full 55 minutes. So I have basically 24 hours of contact a year with my clients. That is way more than what if you add up most doctors' visits, so I end up getting deeper into their lives, deeper into what they're dealing with. And I'm able to work way more holistically in all of the life circumstances, relationship circumstances, which more and more and more evidence now is coming out of showing physical pain in people's body relates to emotional trauma, and hormonal circumstances relates to stress. And then stress is in dealing with their calendars and dealing with their relationship to their work and how they breathe during the day. And so, I do have the privilege to spend that kind of time with my clients, but it's because I built it that way. And it's also just how I like to interact with people. I'm not any good at giving people 10% of me or 50. I suck at it. It's like, I am you get all of me all the time, or we're not doing this. And so that's kind of where it all came from.
Well, it's very, very, very brilliant. It's certainly inspiring, attractive, and it seems to me essential to what it really means to be a human whose intention is to be a healing source for others. So thank you for being exactly that.
Yeah.
There's, let's talk a little bit about this amount of time and this boutique that this boutique practice that you have now set up. So, I just did some quick math, and if you go with the average doctor seeing someone on the high end, meaning 7 minutes instead of the 5 minutes that you said, like actually going the extra 2 minutes to 7 minutes per visit. And then you get that they, on a very high end, they might see their fairly well patients on a very high end 4 times a year. But come on, really, you and I both know it's more likely to be once a year. But let's just say for whatever reason, they're checking in on them. Maybe some medicine needs to be, monitored every 3 months or so. Who knows?
Right.
We're talking then for a total of 28 minutes a year.
Yeah.
Now, when we say that, that's actually the equivalent of 1/2 of one of your sessions.
Yeah.
So you actually are seeing people 40 times. The amount of time you're spending with people is 40 times more than the amount of times that their other physician is spending with them.
Yeah.
Well, and that's, by the way, right? We overestimated we're on the high end. I'm right. If we really get to once a year, now we're talking about 160 times. And if we really get to 5 minutes instead of 7 minutes, now we're talking about 250 times. We're really, and that's really the truth about being with someone, about really getting their world, about really getting what's up for them, about really getting where their pains and discomforts are coming from, as well as their pleasures and their breakthroughs. After all, like what's really working is you have access to that as well in your analysis or your interactivity with these people. Do you call your people patients, by the way? Do you call your clients
don't.
patients?
I call them clients.
Yeah.
And just real quick, it's I love looking up the history of words and where things come from. And our doctor-patient relationship inherently comes out of a hierarchical relationship and is very much rooted in the patriarchy of like, you're going to go to an expert, typically used to be a white man, who is got the answers and you don't. And then we also have a lot of victim conversation around patients and around having diseases. And so I stand in the language of consultant and client. And then inside that, my client has hired me as their doctor to produce a particular result in their life. And I'm on the hook for it.
Yeah. Right. No, I couldn't agree more. That's very aligned with my approach and as well, which is that, the power gradient that's initially and immediately created in the doctor-patient relationship is incurable in its own right. It's insurmountable in its own right, as long as it remains a doctor and patient relationship. Whereas in the world of consultant client, there's a laterality. There's something like looking across the table at each other as humans that becomes very real and very possible. Indeed, you are a consultant, and that's for sure who you are. Indeed, this is someone who has hired you, and therefore as a client. And the possibility for soaring into health seems much more likely even in that linguistic setup than the typical conventional one. Yeah, wonderful. So, naturopath. Let's see what that is. So we talk a little bit about how naturopath got its. You were saying as someone who's really looked at the source of words, you had mentioned earlier about how as a naturopath you take your template for how to source healing from nature directly. That's the word at the start of naturopath, it seems. Can you tell me a little bit what separates a naturopath from let's say a homeopath or maybe not so much, but I guess not so much like why are you different than an osteopath, a homeopath, an allopath, a psychopath? Wait a minute. Sorry about that. I really want you to get for us how is it that naturopathy works for you? What does it mean to be a naturopath is kind of what I'm asking.
What is it to be a naturopath, or what is naturopathic medicine? Is that correct?
Yeah. So what is naturopathy and what is it? How is it that this resonates with your soul? How is it that this describing yourself as a naturopath really works for you to be 100%? Like you said, this is not 50%. This is not half you. This is not what you do on the side. This is indeed who you are as a source human. So what is naturopathy and how does it work for you?
That's awesome. So naturopathic medicine is, there's technical definitions, but I'm going to give you the world according to Sarah Marshall, which is, it is what medicine always was.
Exactly, right?
And actually, if you look historically, all medical doctors were trained in homeopathy and herbal medicine up until about 1920, 1930. And then it started to shift over. At the turn of the 20th century in 1900, 80% of all medical schools had the majority of their medicines were herbal or naturally sourced because we didn't have pharmaceuticals. We hadn't invented that realm of medicine yet.
No, Rockefeller and Flexner had not arrived at that point yet. Yep.
And if you look back at homeopathy, Hahnemann, who's the father of homeopathy, he treated Napoleon. He treated many of the kings and queens of the major kingdoms and monarchs throughout Europe, and was dealing, interestingly enough, a lot with dealing with epidemics of infectious disease, which is where homeopathy really originated in that issue and thrived. And there's a ton of success of homeopathy and natural medicine inside what we're dealing with today in the pandemic. So naturopathic medicine, in my description of really what it is it's about using natural substances that are going to be non-toxic and do the least, if not no harm to the body, that will restore the body's organ systems back to functioning the way they're supposed to. Because like I said earlier, if the organism is already fully functioning and you get an illness, it's really simple. It's an acute illness. And your immune system creates a fever on purpose. It creates snot on purpose. It creates diarrhea potentially on purpose, all as mechanisms to expel the bug.
Exactly.
Snot is a slip and slide to get bacteria and viruses out of our nose.
Right.
As is diarrhea, and vomiting is also another eject button. And fevers literally are an immune system response, not the bug doing it to us. It's our body's way of increasing the heat, which increases the functionality of our enzymes, our metabolism goes up, our detoxification systems all process better, and we're able to kill off the bug. And so that's all a normal, healthy process.
So let's get this straight.
Yeah.
Look, I had Robert Fields on earlier. I don't know if you know him. He's my real close friend. I love Robert, and we have regular conversations about stuff like this. So one of the things I really want to make clear what you're saying here is that fever, diarrhea, snot, vomiting, even sweating, and these natural processes to deal with dis-ease.
Crying, sobbing,
indeed. Yeah, right. Yeah. Even peeing, I guess, yes. Really are processes that we count on that actually represent health rather than not health. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. And it's all the body's natural mechanisms to get out toxicity or get out an offending organism. Mm-hmm. So naturopathic medicine, mostly you can assist in an acute illness if the body is stuck or you're trying to make sure that it doesn't go into what are they saying now? Like the immune system attacks. There's a technical word for it.
Autoimmune.
Not autoimmune, but like in COVID, what happens when the acute response tips over a certain line, you end up with a cytokine storm. And the cytokine storm
is what we talked about all yesterday.
Yep, it's an overreaction of the immune system. That's so perfect, right? Yeah. So, there are things we can do naturally to help mitigate a fever, make sure that it doesn't go beyond the point of the body's physiologic limits. But mostly, when you have an acute illness in a healthy person, the thing to do is nothing.
You're right. Isn't that right?
Let it run its course, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So to be honest, at this stage of medicine, like my mentor, Dr. Tom, he's been in medicine for 40 plus years, and he talks about all these acute illnesses he's treated. Well, honestly, nobody comes to me for acute illnesses. They just don't. They take something over the counter or they go get antibiotics or whatever else, right? So almost all of my clinical practice has been with chronic disease. And so naturopathic medicine is about dealing with what happened such that the body's not restoring itself back to homeostasis and complete balance. Is there something missing in the liver? Is there something missing in the colon? Is there something missing in the spleen? Is there something missing in the digestive tract? Like, what is going on such that that's the case? And then we use herbs, homeopathy, hydrotherapy, lifestyle medicine, which includes like exercise, breathing, diet, sleep hygiene, all of these different tools to support the body in being able to restore itself back to a place where it can then process these obstacles to cure, is the way we put it, and release it out into the environment and restore back to health. That's a revolutionary concept. Most of my clients, I'm the first doctor that's told them with a chronic illness they could get better, that's even an option.
Well, I need to tell you, you're the second doctor on this show in less than 24 hours who has said the same thing. So awesome. It's really, really interesting. We had David Hans come on yesterday, and he was just amazing and really speaking to this whole notion that there is never anything good that chronic illness brings forth at all. Nothing. And that there's an opportunity when looking at the chronicity of illness to not only correct, but eliminate, like literally disappear the whole notion that there's anything chronic going on in the first place that is sourcefully diseasing. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, the other question you asked me though is like, how is this like resonant with my soul? And like, why am I all in on naturopathic medicine? And it was really wild because I actually didn't grow up knowing that naturopathic physicians existed. I actually did take homeopathy and herbal medicine, and I actually wore crystals around my neck and did guided meditation visualizations because I was a kid, one of those atopic. I had asthma. I had immune system dysfunction. I had bronchitis. I had pneumonia. I eventually got a pretty serious case of mononucleosis. So like I dealt with a lot of those kinds of illnesses as a child. And my mom was really awesome about us balancing kind of half 1 foot in the conventional medical world with inhalers and steroids and nebulizer treatments as needed, and then the other half in everything I just described, right? But I didn't know there was a doctor who specialized in this until I was 24 years old. I was a year out of my undergraduate degree of professional chemistry, and I had been traveling in Panama, and I flew home and picked up a natural health magazine, and there was an advertisement for what used to be an online school that doesn't exist anymore for naturopathic physicians. And the advertisement said, you will be a naturopathic doctor. And I had never heard that phrase.
That's
and I was like,
hilarious.
what is that? It was literally a lightning bolt moment. Like something just hit me. I went home, I Googled it, I found the accredited medical school programs for naturopathic physicians. And 72 hours later, I was filling out applications to go to med school.
And did you go to Seattle, or where did you end up going?
I went to Portland. It's now called the National University of Natural Medicine, but it was the National College of Natural Medicine at the time.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And so so how does this, when you really are through and through, it's quite clear that you're not a naturopath when, upon the arrival of the client, you're a naturopath through and through in how you look at the world, how you deal with the world, how you manage the vital force of the world, how you, correct your own pathway, how you correct your family's pathway. These are really, it's quite clear that, this is the way that you do life, right? I mean, is there a time where you don't really get to give up work when you're you, do you? You're just a naturopath as a way of being.
No, and I've even participated in other disciplines of personal growth and development, and I was a leader in those, and I spent a lot of time in more of the coaching realm outside of my clinical practice, and it was all there too. Like it was standing for people to remove the obstacles in their life that were preventing them from freedom, fulfillment, all that. Yeah. So it's like, and that was what I had that experience when I went online. I found the 6 tenets of naturopathic medicine. And the first tenet is Latin. It's vis medicatrix nocture, and it stands for the healing power of nature. And you literally just said it, the vital force. And that's the very foundational principle, is that the vital force exists in all living things. And if somebody has chronic illness, it's because their vital force is weak.
Right.
And it's our job to restore that. And then the second tenet is doctor is teacher. And just right there, as I read these pages, it literally, my experience was, it was like reading pages out of my journals. I just didn't know it existed. And it was just a done deal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just amazing. Dr. Hahnemann is I'm not sure I wasn't him in a previous life. That's how close I am to him. I love the man to the bottom of my soul. And I really want you to speak now for those listeners out there who know a little bit about homeopathy, or a little bit about, who doesn't know a little bit about conventional allopathy or conventional medicine at this point, but really, You've interfaced, and sometimes I've even heard you absorb the notion of homeopathy as a form, or is it as a form, or as a sister, as a friend of, or is it in fact as a core piece of naturopathic medicine?
Ooh, that depends on who you ask. According to me, homeopathy is a critical core central part of naturopathic medicine, even if you never use a homeopathic remedy in your practice, because the homeopathic remedies are powerful and they make a great difference, but it's the philosophy that it's built on is the crux of what we do as naturopathic physicians, where I talk about it like the difference between me and a medical doctor is we both are looking at the same data. But if you can go back this far and remember a time before digital photography, there was negatives and then the photograph. And they have the same data in them, but they're literally the inverse of each other. So where a medical doctor trained in allopathic medicine, which if you break that word down, literally means the opposite of, they're going to look at high blood pressure and they're going to apply a chemical agent that will force the body into lowering the factors that will lower your blood pressure. It works. And in a heroic state, you might need that if it's life threatening. But in naturopathic medicine, I'm going to see high blood pressure and I'm going to look at what can I put into the body? What is missing the presence of which would make a difference for the body to restore itself back to self-regulating and self-managing itself without the need for the pressure in the pipes. So in homeopathy, the core foundation is in what we call like curing like. You're looking for a remedy out in nature, a plant, a mineral, or a substance of any sort that is going to fit like a hand on a glove to the patient's symptoms, such that it's putting the information back into the organism to naturally restore itself back to harmony.
Understood, and really, really greatly appreciated, and very, very well stated. Thank you. This idea of the negative and the positive, of looking the same data and getting sort of the opposite response. I mean, the difference between allopathy and homeopathy in your construct here is literally the difference between night and day. Literally, that they're, it's the same data at night as there is in a day too. I mean, the same stuff is out here, and how we manage this, whether we lean on something called a vital force or we call everything that looks like it's out of balance, the sickness itself really alters the entire context of how we approach life as a whole, is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And man, we can zoom way out here too, because, in some of the other things I love to study is like, why are human beings the way human beings are? Why do we do that? One of my favorite books is a book called Sapiens that goes into great detail of accounting for the history of humanity and how we ended up having empires, how we ended up having crusades, why we do those things. And in the last 3,000 years for sure, maybe a little bit longer than that, there has been a context human beings have lived inside of me versus you, and war and violence and force as being our solutions for survival. And allopathic medicine is literally birthed out of that philosophy. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just only going to produce certain results. As we can literally look around and see, we have more medications, more surgeries, more allopathic medicine is being practiced than ever before, and we are literally sicker for it. Now, it's not just allopathic, because our health system, our food system, there's a lot of factors, right?
Sure.
But it's literally a paradigm shift, and it's the same paradigm shift. Like I'm a bit of a rebel, and I know, shocking. I had a paper I was supposed to write in naturopathic school, and it was supposed to be this case study. We were supposed to pick some clinical disease situation and break the whole case study apart. And I got excited about writing up global warming as a patient. And I literally wrote up this state of the earth as a fever state, an inflammatory state, a deficiency state of nutrition, toxicity state, right? I almost failed that, because that was really not the point of the paper, but I really loved what I created. But it was this investigation for me of the macrocosm and the microcosm, that at all levels we're dealing with the same thing. And so you can actually look at how we've chosen to deal with COVID, how we've chosen to deal with the current standing of the climate crisis. And if you look it through the lens of allopathy, of just this inherent attempt to fight a war, shut it down, stop the things from happening, it's just not getting us anywhere. And if you look at it through the lens of homeopathy or naturopathic medicine, of what's missing that we need to put in that will naturally allow the systems to restore itself, you end up with bacteria that can eat toxic waste. You end up with plants that could clean our water instead of chemicals. You end up with hydroponics and vertical gardening solutions that could actually decrease our farmland and increase our wilderness. You end up, there's just it's all the same paradigm.
It's just beautiful. Really. Just awesome. Stupendous. Awesome. Thank you. Sarah, it's hard. It's hard to end this conversation. It's always hard. It's always hard.
Yeah.
And really, we could explore, and we will and should explore together what it is that we can do together, and what it is. I know I'm very interested in learning more about. I'd love to read this paper, by the way, and learning more about who you are and following you, and maybe how about if you give our listeners an opportunity to know how they can follow you? Like, where do you have a website? Do you have an email? Do you have something you can tell us about?
Yeah. So my website is sarahmarshallnd, as in naturopathicdoctor.com. And you'll find my information there, but also you'll find the podcast Heal. Heal is also on all the popular platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher. And honestly, the best way to look for it at this point is to look up Sarah Marshall, and you'll find it right away. And that's one of the best ways to just get in touch with learning more from me, from my guests. Heal is all about people sharing their stories of healing. And so it's a lot of people just talking about what they've been through, really unbelievably vulnerable and authentic. And also I do have guest experts who come, but I also don't let them get away with just being the expert that knows the things. They got to share themselves too. So it's super fun. That's really the best way to be in contact with me, is through my website, and to check out the podcast. And if it resonates, let me know.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And of course, whatever you'll have on this particular podcast, we'll have some links to whatever it is you want to show us, or what it is you want to share, including a link to your own podcast. So really wonderful. And Sarah, it has really been an honor. And for those of us who recognize some of the phraseology you use, it's kind of a hilarious honor when you start going at what's missing, the presence of which would make a difference. There's something that's very beautiful that comes from the universality of that particular question. And, with all, with the growth and development aspect of looking at that, not from there being something wrong, but from being something that we can add to the picture to rebalance the entire circumstance that we're exploring. A whole new level of possibility, a whole new realm of possibility emerges. And so I really thank you for representing that so well today.
Oh my gosh, this has been the best. And I learned some things about myself in the process, which was awesome.
Perfect. Okay. Well, great. Well, that's what we love hearing at the end. It is really, I don't even know how it happens, but my goodness, I do love hearing that. So, all right. Well, listeners, it's been an honor and a pleasure, right? I mean, how extraordinary of a conversation this is, and how extraordinary of a woman, of a doctor, of a friend, of an explorer, of a daughter, of an edge dweller is Sarah Marshall. On with your life you go. I mean, thanks for spending the hour or so to be with Sarah and I today. Sarah, thanks for being on the show, on the podcast, on this episode. And it's really, really been beautiful. So everyone else, have a great rest of the day. Have a great rest of the week. Have a great rest of the month. Have a great rest of the year, and maybe even a great life, because here's what's here. Every single aspect of humanity is something worth cherishing. And I mean that when I say every single aspect. You saw Sarah and I walk through some of the more uncomfortable aspects of life earlier in this hour. And even those are maybe in some ways more worth embracing than the others. So Welcome to Humanity is focusing on that. And it's just been another really just a pleasure to get another peek at an extraordinary human being. Thanks for being with us, Sarah Marshall. It's been a deep honor. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. What I'm walking away from this conversation with Sarah Marshall is what a brilliant soul. And, when you go all in, whatever you're doing, you get the results that just are unpredictable and unmanageable. And then when you go all in at your work, you get to live your work and your home and your play life being the same person. So as a naturopath, I've never met anybody really at any level so committed to the natural healing of not just her clients, but the world around her. And so inspiring, so moving, so entertaining. What a wonderful soul. What a great guest. Thank you. So maybe as you were listening, you thought of a person or maybe a group of people who would really, really benefit from this episode. Go ahead and reach out to them right now, invite them to listen, and then to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And while you're at it, I'd like to ask you to subscribe as well. Could you just take a moment and hit the subscribe button on your podcast player? And that way you can be sure to get the latest episodes as they become available. If you appreciate what we're doing here, could you just take a few minutes and leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts? As it turns out that subscribes and reviews are the two major ways we can reach more listeners with the Welcome to Humanity podcast. If the conversations we're having here are contributing in any real way to your life, please pay it forward and subscribe and leave a positive review. I would be truly grateful for your support. Also, in order to catch up with the past episodes, head on over to welcometohumanity.net/podcast. So until next time, this is Dr. Fred, and it has been another wonderful edition of Welcome to Humanity podcast. Thanks for listening. Have a beautiful day. Bye for now.